Oh, God, yeah. I was in a marvelous room with another fellow who who said to there was a very cold-looking nurse, very stern. And
Picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday evening in 1979, and one of Hollywood's most beloved actors is sitting across from a television host, expecting another routine chat about his latest movie. But what happens next would shock everyone in the studio and create a piece of television history that almost no one would ever see again. Walter Matthau, the grumpy but lovable star of The Odd Couple and countless other classics, had done hundreds of interviews throughout his career. He was known for being funny, honest, and sometimes a little cranky, but always professional. That night, however, something went terribly wrong. Within minutes of the interview starting, Matthau would stand up, rip off his microphone, and storm out of the studio, never to return to that show again. What could have possibly made this usually good-natured actor so angry that he would abandon an interview in front of a live studio audience? The answer lies in a story that Hollywood has tried to forget, but the truth is finally coming to light. Walter Matthau wasn't just any actor. Born Walter Matyshansky in New York City's Lower East Side in 1920, he grew up dirt poor with a father who abandoned the family when Walter was just 3 years old. His mother, Rose, worked in a garment factory to keep food on the table. And young Walter learned early that life could be tough and unfair. But Walter had something special inside him. Even as a kid, he could make people laugh and forget their troubles for a while. He discovered acting in high school and knew right away that this was what he wanted to do with his life. The problem was nobody thought a guy who looked like Walter Matthau could become a movie star. You see, Walter didn't have the typical Hollywood leading man looks. His face was long and droopy, with bags under his eyes that made him look tired even when he wasn't. His voice was gravelly and rough. Studio executives took one look at him and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." But Walter refused to give up. He spent years doing small parts in plays and tiny roles in movies, often playing criminals or tough guys because of his distinctive face. He was talented, but he was also stubborn and had a quick temper when people treated him unfairly. Throughout his career, Walter developed a reputation for speaking his mind. Sometimes when it wasn't the smartest thing to do, he would call out directors who he thought were incompetent. He would argue with producers about scripts that didn't make sense. And he absolutely hated it when interviewers asked him stupid questions or tried to make him look bad. Most of the time, Walter's honesty was refreshing. Audiences loved that he didn't pretend to be perfect or put on fake smiles like some other celebrities. He would openly talk about his gambling problems, which had cost him millions of dollars over the years. He would admit when a movie he was in wasn't very good. He treated interviews like conversations with friends, which made him incredibly popular with talk show hosts and audiences alike. Walter appeared on shows with Johnny Carson, Dick Cavett, and many other famous hosts throughout the 1970s and 1980s. He was always entertaining, telling funny stories about working with other actors or sharing his opinions about everything from baseball to classical music. Yes, classical music. Most people didn't know that this tough-looking guy from New York absolutely loved Mozart and would often carry around handwritten pieces of Shakespeare in his pockets. But there was one interview that would be different from all the others. According to people who were there that night, Walter arrived at the television studio in a great mood. He had just finished filming a movie he was excited about, and he was looking forward to talking about it with the host and the audience. The show was being taped for a broadcast later that week, which was normal for most talk shows at that time. Walter sat down in the guest chair, got his microphone attached, and chatted casually with the host during the commercial break. Everything seemed perfectly normal. When the camera started rolling and the interview began, the host introduced Walter with the usual praise about his career and his latest projects. Walter smiled and waved to the audience, who gave him warm applause. But then, something started to go wrong. According to witnesses in the studio that night, the host began asking questions that seemed designed to embarrass Walter rather than promote his work. Instead of asking about his new movie or his famous partnership with Jack Lemmon, the host started digging into Walter's personal life in ways that crossed the line. The host brought up Walter's gambling addiction, but not in a respectful way that acknowledged how he had worked to overcome it. Instead, The questions were mean-spirited, almost like the host was trying to shame Walter for his past mistakes. Then the host started asking about Walter's family, including his children and his wife Carol, in ways that made Walter visibly uncomfortable. But the moment that broke Walter's patience came when the host made a comment about Walter's appearance. Remember, Walter had spent his entire career dealing with people who judged him based on how he looked rather than his talent. He had worked incredibly hard to prove that he was more than just his unusual face, and he had earned respect as one of Hollywood's best actors. When the host made what witnesses described as a cruel joke about Walter's looks, suggesting that he was only successful because audiences felt sorry for him, Walter's face turned red with anger. For a few seconds, he sat there in stunned silence, probably trying to decide how to respond. Walter could have made a joke back at the host. He could have given a sharp comeback that would have put the interviewer in his place, while still keeping things light. He was certainly quick-witted enough to do that, but instead, Walter made a decision that shocked everyone in the studio. He stood up from his chair while the cameras were still rolling and began unhooking his microphone. The host tried to laugh it off, probably thinking Walter was just making a dramatic gesture to get laughs from the audience. But Walter's face was deadly serious. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," Walter said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The studio audience, which had been laughing and applauding just moments before, went completely silent. They could tell that this wasn't part of the show. This was real. Walter dropped his microphone on the chair and started walking toward the exit. The host, now realizing that this wasn't a joke, tried to call him back. "Walter, come on. We're just having fun here. Don't take it so seriously." But Walter didn't stop walking. Without turning around, he said something that the people in the studio would never forget. "Fun is when everyone gets to laugh, not when you pick on someone to make yourself look clever." And with that, Walter Matthau walked out of the studio, leaving behind a very embarrassed host, a confused audience, and a piece of television that would never see the light of day. The producers of the show made an immediate decision. They couldn't air an interview that ended with the guest storming out, especially when the host had been so clearly inappropriate. The tape was locked away, and the show's producers had to scramble to find a replacement guest for that week's episode. But the story doesn't end there. Word of what happened spread quickly through Hollywood. Other talk show hosts heard about the incident and made sure to treat Walter with more respect when he appeared on their shows. Some actors even started refusing to appear on that particular show, saying they didn't want to work with a host who would ambush guests with personal attacks. Walter never spoke publicly about what happened that night. When other interviewers asked him about it in later years, he would just smile and change the subject. But people who knew him well said that the incident really hurt him. He had always tried to be honest and open in interviews, and having that openness turned against him made him more cautious about what shows he would agree to appear on. The host of that show never apologized publicly, but according to industry insiders, he did try to reach out to Walter privately to make amends. Walter reportedly never returned his calls. What makes this story even more interesting is that it shows a side of Walter Matthau that most people never got to see. Yes, he was known for being grumpy and speaking his mind, but he was also someone who had real feelings and could be deeply hurt by cruelty. Throughout his career, Walter had to deal with people who made fun of his appearance or treated him like he wasn't as good as other actors because he didn't look like a typical movie star. Most of the time, he handled it with humor and grace. But everyone has a breaking point, and that night in 1979, Walter reached his. The lost interview became something of a legend in television circles. Young producers and hosts were told the story as a warning about how not to treat guests. It became an example of what could happen when an interviewer let their ego get in the way of doing their job professionally. For Walter, the incident seemed to make him even more selective about the interviews he would do. He continued to appear on talk shows throughout the 1980s and 1990s, but he was more careful about which hosts he trusted. He preferred working with people like Johnny Carson and Dick Cavett, who were known for treating their guests with respect and genuine interest. Walter's career certainly didn't suffer because of the walkout. If anything, it probably helped his reputation among fellow actors who saw him as someone who wouldn't put up with unprofessional behavior. He continued making great movies, including more odd couple films with Jack Lemmon and other comedies that showed off his incredible timing and natural charm. The incident also revealed something important about Walter's character. Despite being famous and successful, he never forgot where he came from or how it felt to be treated poorly. He had grown up poor and had to fight for every opportunity he got. When someone tried to humiliate him on television, it probably reminded him of all the times in his life when people had looked down on him for being different. But Walter's reaction also showed his dignity. He didn't yell or make a scene that would have made things worse for everyone involved. He simply refused to participate in something that he felt was wrong, and he removed himself from the situation with as much class as possible under the circumstances. Years later, when Walter was older and even more respected in Hollywood, younger actors would sometimes ask him for advice about dealing with difficult interviews or hostile media. He would tell them that the most important thing was to never compromise their self-respect for the sake of publicity. You can be funny, you can be charming, you can even be controversial, Walter would say, but you never have to let anyone make you feel small. The lost interview tape supposedly still exists somewhere in the network's archives, locked away and forgotten by most people. Some television historians have tried to get access to it, but the network has always refused. They probably want to protect the reputation of the host, who went on to have a long career in television, and they don't want to remind people of what was clearly one of their more embarrassing moments. But the story of what happened that night has taken on a life of its own. It had become a reminder that even beloved celebrities are human beings with feelings, and that treating people with respect is always more important than getting a good laugh or making good television. Walter Matthau passed away in 2000 at the age of 79, having lived a full life filled with great movies, loving relationships, and the respect of his peers. He was remembered not just as a great actor, but as someone who stood up for himself and others when it mattered. The host from that night continued working in television for many more years, but those who knew about the incident said he was never quite as cutting or mean-spirited in his interviews after that. Maybe he learned something from Walter's reaction, or maybe he just realized that being cruel to guests wasn't worth the risk of having them walk out. Today, in an age of social media and viral videos, it's hard to imagine a moment like Walter's walkout staying hidden for so long. If something like that happened now, it would be all over the internet within hours, analyzed and debated by millions of people. But back in 1979, television was still controlled by networks and producers who could decide what the public would or wouldn't see. The lost interview remains a fascinating piece of television history, not because of what we can see, but because of what we can't. It reminds us that there have always been moments of real human drama happening behind the scenes of our entertainment, moments that reveal the true character of the people involved. Walter Matthau's decision to walk out of that interview wasn't just about one bad experience with one rude host. It was about a lifetime of proving that he was more than what people saw on the surface, and his refusal to let anyone treat him as less than he deserved to be treated. In the end, Walter's walkout became more powerful than any interview he could have completed that night. It showed the world that success and fame don't mean you have to accept disrespect, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stand up and walk away. The lost interview may be gone forever, but the lesson it taught us about dignity, respect, and standing up for yourself will always remain. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly the way Walter Matthau would have wanted it. So the next time you're watching an old Walter Matthau movie and laughing at his perfectly timed jokes or his grumpy but lovable characters, remember that behind that distinctive face was a man who never forgot his values, even when the cameras were rolling and the whole world was watching. That's the real story of the lost interview that made Walter Matthau storm off and never return. Not just a moment of television history, but a reminder that true stars are made not just by their talent, but by their character. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible piece of lost television history, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends who love classic Hollywood stories. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating tales from the golden age of entertainment that you won't hear anywhere else. There are so many more incredible stories like this one just waiting to be told, and we'll be here to bring them to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.